Welcome to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Mini First Aid are the UK's leading family first aid provider, and we are delighted to bring our latest podcast series to you, giving you all the information that you need around family health subjects. Thanks for joining. Welcome to the Family Health Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Unity Mutual, a trusted partner for your savings and investments and partner that understands your commitment to your child's health and financial future. When you choose Unity Mutual for a junior individual savings account, you secure your child's savings journey and receive a free mini first aid class. But it's not just about caring for their health, it's also about setting them up for a brighter future. Unity Mutual believes in enriching lives beyond pounds and pence, empowering you with both financial stability and life-enhancing opportunities. Let's dive in. Hello, I'm Kate, founder of Mini First Aid. Welcome to our podcast, Family Health by Mini First Aid. Now, I am delighted that you've decided to join us for our Series 2 of our podcast, where we are going to continue to bring you some of the top family health advice from leading experts. Today, I'm delighted to introduce two very special guests. Michelle Whaley, an ambassador for the Children's Burns Trust, whose son Charlie was badly burned when he was 2 years old, and Sue Bozeman, who's returning to us for Series 2, advanced nurse practitioner who also works with the Children's Burns Trust. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Good morning.
Sue, first of all, to you, can you remind us what you do in relation to the Children's Burns Trust?
Absolutely. So my day job is an advanced nurse in the Regional Burn Service. But as part of my role, I'm also an ambassador for the Children's Burns Trust because I'm really passionate about prevention and first aid and all things to do with burns. So I support them alongside my day job.
Amazing. Thank you, Sue. Michelle, tell us briefly how you came to work alongside the Children's Burns Trust.
So my son is a burn survivor. My son is now 15, is in year 10 at school. And I don't know if you can hear banging, but I live in a new building site and they're building a house next door. So apologies if you can hear banging. I don't know if you can.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. And it's very real because we're all living our real lives, Michelle. So that's absolutely fine.
Bang, bang, bang next door.
That's fine.
So my son is a burn survivor. He suffered an accident, a burns accident when he was 15 months old and is now 15. He was treated at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, had incredible treatment there. And we've been working alongside the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital since he was really little, actually, because I think when you go through something and you recover and you survive, you want to give back. You want to use your experience for good to help others. And then we actually published a book, and the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital put us in touch with the National Children's Burns Trust because they said this book could actually go into lots of hospitals, not just Manchester. So let us put you in touch with the national charity, and then just started working alongside the Children's Burns Trust, and then they invited me to be an ambassador. Sometimes how life rock and rolls, doesn't it? You don't set out with this plan. You just you take one step at a time, and doors open, and that's how it goes. It's a real privilege.
So Sue, just thinking about Michelle's role at Children's Burns Trust, how important is it for Children's Burns Trust to have people like Michelle in the team?
Hugely, absolutely hugely important, because the actual real life stories are, that's what affects everybody. That's what touches everybody, is really, you can hear all the science and all the statistics and everything else, but actually when you hear the impact that a burn injury has had on a family, then it's so powerful. And so it's so important that we have people like Michelle who are prepared to share that story with others and help us all to understand.
Thank you. Now, I confess, I don't know whether it is a confession, but I've actually heard Michelle's story on a couple of occasions. But Michelle came and spoke most recently at our Mini First Aid conference, where we work with all our first aid trainers, big training event that happens annually. And I think it's fair to say, Michelle, that you could have heard a pin drop in the room when you were sharing your story. And if it's okay with you today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about it. And I'm very conscious that with all these things, and particularly as a mum myself, it's emotional stuff when you're talking about your own children. It's a hugely emotive, and I'm sure there may also be people listening today who may have experienced their child or a child they know being burnt, or maybe just find the story itself quite emotive. But I think it's a really, really important story to share. So can you tell me, Michelle, what happened with your son's accident and how you felt?
Yeah, of course. Family life is, well, our family life, and it doesn't ever seem to calm down, but it's just mad. So I've got two boys. I've got a stepson as well, who's gorgeous. He's 24, and my two boys are 15 and 18. And I think since being a mum, it's just never calmed down. And life is busy, and as mums, we spin plates constantly, don't we? Mm-hmm. So going back to the night of my son's accident, we were actually going on holiday that night. My husband and I ran a small electrical contracting business. We were self-employed. And my elder son was 4 and he was at school. So it was that typical day where you're going on holiday, you've not yet got everything ready for it. Because you're self-employed, you're trying to make sure everything's in place for this week off. Because it's not like somebody is just going to continue the work while you're not there. So tying up loose ends at work, getting stuff ready for the holiday. You're like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but you like to leave your house tidy so you come back to a tidy house, just general family life. And I'd been at work, I'd picked up my eldest son from school, then I'd gone to nursery to pick up Charlie. So Charlie was 15 months old. And when I picked him up from nursery, they said, he's not been very well today. He sounds a little bit chesty and he's not quite being himself. Thinking, heck, we were going skiing that night. The taxi was coming for us at 2:00 in the morning. I thought, I wonder if I can get him in at the doctor's before we go, because I don't want him, poorly in France. So managed to get him in at the doctor's, and the doctor said, I think he's got a bit of a chest infection. I'm going to prescribe him some antibiotics. So then you went to the chemist to get the antibiotics. So got home later than I'd envisaged, because I'd sort of not factored Charlie being poorly in to the day. And you'll know, Kate, from your work, children can get quite poorly quite quickly. So in the morning they're okay, but then by tea time they're actually, you think, oh, there's something not quite right with them.
Absolutely.
So I can remember very clearly I had a beef stew in the oven, and so all I needed to do was all the vegetables to go with it. We got home later and I thought, right, I'm going to get tea on. I'll just use one pan and put everything in one pan. So put my potatoes in, put my carrots in, put my peas in. We lived in a small bungalow, a small little open plan bungalow. I was on my own in the kitchen and the boys were just playing together in like the adjoining room. And I put my peas in and I thought, oh, Charlie's antibiotics. I wonder if I've got to give him on an empty stomach, or does he have to have them with food or after food? I'd not stopped to look at that detail on the medication when I'd collected from the chemist, so I left my kitchen. So I left my kitchen to go to my front door, where I'd just dumped all the bags when I'd come in. And I got to my front door and I heard a scream. I think I said at the night it was a scream. I remember, and I can so clearly remember my thoughts thinking, oh my gosh, one of my children has severed a limb. I had this image of them having chopped an arm off or chopped a leg off, because it was a scream that I had never, ever, ever heard a scream like it. And children bump and fall, frequently when they're learning to walk, and you go to play parks. You used to scrape knees and bump heads. It's almost part of motherhood, but this was different. It just felt really, really intense. I knew there was something really serious had happened, and I ran back, and then I saw Charlie was lying on my kitchen floor with vegetables around him and water, and I knew at that point what had happened. So as I'd left my kitchen, he'd gone in. And I wish I'd have attended stuff like this. I wish there was stuff like this around when I was a mum. If there was, I'd not accessed it. No one had made me aware of it. So I'd used my biggest pan on my front hob.
Right. Right.
with my handle accessible. And Charlie was, I mean, he's 15 now and 6'1", with size 12 feet. He was a big toddler. He was tall for his age, but only 15 months old. So he'd reached up and got the pan handle and pulled the pan.
What do you think?
Over himself.
What do you think made him pull the pan handle? Do you think he was just curious?
I think they are. I think we have this image sometimes of children that their play is all these like plasticky coloured toys and that's play, but actually they love watching you. They want to do what you're doing. They want to put your clothes on and play with your makeup and play with your stuff. That's their play. They're so intelligent, aren't they? And they're so curious. They watch what you do. When you pick up that cup of coffee, they're going to reach to pick up that cup of coffee because that's what they do. And that's how they learn. They learn by watching. So
you, Michelle, you discovered, you came into the kitchen and found the pan and Charlie and water everywhere and him on the floor. What was the first thing? What did you do immediately? What happened next?
I can even remember, Kate. I can even remember the way he was looking at me lying on the floor. I can remember his eyes. And the look in his eyes was absolutely terrified. And we know how much it hurts if we catch ourselves when we're cooking or when we're ironing. You catch yourself on a bit of steam. Or the other day I got something out of my oven and my oven gloves are beginning to perish a little bit. And I just felt the heat coming through onto my oven glove. I can't begin to imagine the pain that these children that suffer, significant burn injuries, I can't begin to imagine the pain that they go through. So he's there on the floor. I knew we'd come in from nursery, it was January the 14th, 2010. I remember he was wearing a jumper, and I went to get his jumper off, and as I took his jumper off, his skin was coming off.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't know in that moment, I didn't know whether I should carry on taking his clothes off or not. I'd not had first aid training and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if it was right or wrong, whether I was causing him more damage by doing that. I knew that I had to cool it. I think that's something in us, isn't it? When you catch yourself on the oven or the iron, you know that you run it under cold water. So I knew I had to get it under cold water, but his injury was massive. I couldn't hold him under a tap at the sink because it was too big an injury for that. I knew I had to, I think my first thing was I need to get clothes off and I need to get it cooled. So I took him into my bathroom. We didn't have a shower over the bath, so I took him into the bath, ran the cold water in my bath, and I was trying to hold him under the bath, which is quite awkward. He was trying to get away from the water and he was trying to cling to me, screaming and crying. I remember Oliver was crying in the background and I was trying to hold him under the water. And I also knew I had to ring 999. I just knew it was an emergency and I had to ring 999. But how could I do it all? I was on my own. My husband hadn't come back from work yet. So how could I leave him and get the phone and cool him at the same time, which is, I knew that's what I had to do. What I did was I left him in the bath with the cold water running, ran and got the phone and came back to him. And I'd rung 999, but I remember them saying to me, "We can't hear you. You need to leave your baby because we can't hear what you're trying to tell us."
Oh my gosh.
Because Charlie was screaming, I was crying, and trying to have this 999 call all at the same time, and trying to, manoeuvre him under the cool tap. Yeah, it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
And you made your 999 call and got emergency services. And transferred to hospital. I'm interested now, Sue, to understand from you that when you have a child that's been as significantly burnt as Charlie was, and you have a parent like Michelle who absolutely is going to be in distress, when they arrive through the doors of accident emergency, what happens? What happens for those children and for those parents?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, they arrive in a kind of big mess of screaming child, crying parent. The child's often very cold because the parents have done their best to try and cool them, but then the transfer process can mean that they've actually gone into a little bit of shock. As much as the cooling is so important, and we recommend 20 minutes of cool running water with the burn, Michelle's demonstrated beautifully that the reality is that it's very, very difficult to do that sometimes, and you do your best. Often the parent arrives wet as well as the child, but it's really important that we get everybody in a safe place and for them to know that they're safe and for the staff to be calm. Painkillers straight off, because Michelle's already said, burns are incredibly painful. So getting some painkillers into the child really quickly, getting them warmed up, getting their wet clothes off, assessing their burn as quickly as possible to just see how significant this injury is, because even quite a small burn in a child can be quite significant and make them very unwell very quickly. But they can also very quickly develop shock from the pain of the burn, from the actual injury, and then from the first aid and the cooling process after. So really, really important to get those assessments done, get as much information from the parent as possible, which is obviously very difficult because they're shocked as well. But get everybody feeling safe and comfortable and assessed as quickly as possible. And that's really our aim. Stabilise the child, get the parents settled, and then we can move forward in the burn treatment.
Right, okay. So Michelle, you're at the hospital now, and Sue's articulated there from the clinical teams what happens. What's your memory then, Michelle, of what happened then, and how severe the burns were, and just how sort of, how intense this time was for you and for Charlie?
Yeah, we were taken to our local hospital, which was just Furness General Hospital in Barrow-in-Furness. And Charlie was really, really poorly. I remember I was asking, his bed was surrounded by hospital staff, and there was noise going on in the background. And actually, when my dad came to the hospital, he said that they're in touch with the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, because I think his injury was so significant. They weren't specialists in that type of injury at that hospital. In fact, I know that the paramedic that came to our house said she's never ever taken such a poorly child in an ambulance.
Oh my goodness.
So they didn't have that level of specialism. And so I think the hospital, Manchester Children's Hospital Burns Unit, were advising the General Hospital on what to do. But I remember Charlie was so poorly they had to drill into his bone in his leg to get fluid and medication into him, because he had no veins in his arms and his legs. His body was shutting down. Maybe, as Sue said, going into shock. I didn't know that at the time. I wouldn't have been aware of those signs and symptoms. Well, I wasn't. But I know that they had to drill into his bone, into his bone marrow in his right lower leg. It was so distressing for him. I remember asking the doctor, because all I wanted to know was, is he going to be okay? Is he going to be okay? Is my child going to live? And the doctor saying to me, I can't say he's going to be okay. We can't give you that information yet. And that was really, really scary. Yeah, I thought my child was dying. I thought I was going to lose him.
Michelle, it's the stuff, your voice is like the stuff that you hear in the movies, and those awful television programmes that we inflict on ourselves, where you, and I imagine that everybody listening now, there are mums particularly at this point probably holding their breath to want to know what happened next. Tell us about the process. So what happened next? What did getting better look like, recovery, and what happened to his body? What did it do?
So we were at the local hospital for about 5 hours. It took about 5 hours to get him stable enough to be transferred. They wrapped his burn in cling film. So Charlie, the burn, he was burnt from his lips down, his chin, his neck, his shoulder, his torso. All of his right arm was skinned. That's a horrible word to say, actually. It sounds horrible, doesn't it? But that's sort of the only way I can describe it, really. He'd lost skin from all of that part of his body. At the hospital at Furness General, they said they thought it was about 15% at the time. So it was about 10:30 at night when he was stable enough to be transferred, and we went via ambulance, and we were blue lighted to the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. Now that's 100 miles away from our house. It's a long way. We got there about midnight. I travelled in the ambulance with Charlie, and he was asleep at this point. Okay. I remember I couldn't leave. My head was right next to his head. I couldn't. The whole time it was a hospital, and I was talking to him the whole time. Mummy's here, Mummy's here, Mummy's not going to leave you. Mummy's with you. I love you so much. Mummy's going to help you. Just constantly talking to him the whole time and reassuring him so he could hear my voice. So my face was right next to his face. And we got to Manchester. I mean, it was midnight, and it might be this time at all times of the day or night, but it was so calm. We got there at midnight, and we were welcomed at midnight into the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, and that was the first time that I thought, my child's going to live, he's going to be okay. I just knew he was in the hands of absolute experts that knew what they were doing. This wasn't such a shock to them. They were used to treating this type of injury and this severity of injury, and he was going to be okay. And that was... I can remember that. It's funny, isn't it? It's, 13 years ago, but you remember the emotions, I think, that are linked with certain times of the injury and the accident and the recovery process. And that's the first time that I thought, yeah, we're in the right place here. It's going to be all right. And interestingly enough, the first thing that they did was they took us into a room and they photographed him. So instead of it, we'd gone from a situation where he was surrounded by a variety of hospital staff, and it felt very intense. To me, it felt quite panicked. And then we were in this calm where we're just going to photograph. And they photographed his injury, and then he was taken into high dependency. So he was in his own room. And he was attached to monitors. Sue, I've got that wrong. So they photographed him, and then they cleaned it. They cleaned his wound. They cleaned all of the injury, and then they bandaged it all up. They put a special cream on it, and he was like a mummy then. He was all bandaged up, all of his head and all of his arm. He was completely bandaged up. And then taken into high dependency. So he was in his own room. There's little things. I remember one of the first things that happened when we got to Manchester. He had this little comfort blanket. It was called Rabbit. It had like a little rabbit's head on and a triangle. I think I went through about 18 of those over the course of his time.
Don't we all?
Leaving them, and it's like, where can I buy another one from? Rabbit. And as soon as we got to Manchester, they said, I'm sorry, you can't have that. You've got a big open wound.
Right.
So the risk of infection is really high. And this is a thing I think that people don't perhaps understand about the treatment and recovery of a burn injury is the huge risk of infection. So he was taken into his own room. He was only allowed 2 visitors in there, so me and my husband. We had to wear aprons and things. He wasn't allowed any soft toys at all. Couldn't have woolly jumpers, I don't think. So that comfort toy that he'd had for 15 months, he wasn't allowed that anymore because of the risk of infection that these toys hold. I don't know how much you want me to talk about.
No, that's fine. And do you know what, Michelle, I will ask you about offering him comfort in just a second, but I'm just interested to bring Sue in now. So Sue, obviously, when we're teaching first aid, we talk about cooling with cool running water and covering with cling film. And then at that point, from a first aid perspective, we're transferring to a medical practitioner. So we're going to hospital. And we also talk about not putting any lotions or potions on any burns. But Michelle mentioned some cream there. So I think it would be good to understand, when Michelle was talking about the bandaging and the cream that's being applied, what's happening there? So once the child who's been burnt is in the hands of professionals, what's happening at that point?
Yeah, so as she said, the risk of infection is the biggest risk after shock to a child or any patient who's had a significant burn injury. And so what we need to do really quickly is get that wound nice and clean. And then protect it. So although we don't advise putting any creams onto an open wound at home, when they're in hospital we use specific antiseptic specialist burns creams which help with the pain control, but they also help with prevention of infection, and then all the bandaging to get that wound really nice and clean. And that's a process that we repeat over and over as the burn heals, as I'm sure Michelle will remember. But yes, the risk of infection is the biggest risk to the child, alongside things like fluid management. You use a huge amount of fluid through a burn, more than you would imagine, because when your skin's on, it's holding all that fluid inside, and once your skin's missing, all that fluid is rushing out, and that can make you get very poorly very quickly. So you're trying to replace that fluid as quickly as possible, which is why they weren't able to get veins, unfortunately, with Charlie, and he had to have it through a different method momentarily. But it's real high dependency care in a big burn, certainly for the first few days and weeks until the body has started sufficiently to recover.
What sort of number of people, Sue, would be working on a case like Charlie's at any time or through the process of his care?
So it's a huge team effort. So you've got your nurses and your doctors initially, and you've got people like your anaesthetists who help with pain control and if they need to go to sleep for operations, and your surgeons. But you've also got really important people like your play specialists who help to keep everybody calm and comfortable. You've got dietitians involved because of your fluid balance and making sure you've got the right diet. You've got the psychotherapy team who support everybody along the way. Physiotherapists become very, very important in the rehab process. It's a huge team effort. There's a huge amount of people involved at different times within the healing process. But it doesn't work without every single one of them in place.
That's incredible. Now, Michelle, you were talking about comfort and Charlie losing his comforter, which is understandable for infection control. And then, Sue, you mentioned play specialists. So when somebody is so little, like Charlie is, and play is part of the way that they live their little lives, and they need comfort, because we all know that little people need cuddles and what have you. How did you manage that? What could you do when Charlie was that poorly?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Me. Initially, for the first maybe 24 hours after we got to Manchester, Charlie was unable to placate. He was in a hospital bed, and we were just there talking to him. I used to sing a lot. I used to tell him, all the stories of the Three Little Pigs. So I was constantly using my voice to let him know that I was there and Mummy was there, and singing songs. And there's something inside you as a mum that makes you just want to give to your child whatever distress you're in. It's interesting, Sue said about being wet. So going back a little bit, my husband came back to the house when Charlie was in the bath. I gave him the phone and my husband said, I'm going to put the shower on, and he put the shower on, and I stood under the shower, a cold shower, holding Charlie. So that was the best way really of getting cold water. That was my husband's idea, and it was absolutely brilliant for Charlie. When we got to the hospital, I'd been stood under a cold shower and I was completely unaware that I was wet.
Wow.
You wouldn't go... It's... Your child's needs overtake your own in that moment, and it was the same at the hospital. It's like you don't sleep, but you just know that you've got to be there for your child. So initially in high dependency, it was me singing songs, telling little stories, and they had a play therapist that used to come, and she had like lights and little interactive stuff, and she used to dress up as a clown, and she was absolutely gorgeous. So she used to come and visit him on bed, and his arm that wasn't burnt, because thankfully he had a hand that he was able to use, which was just lovely for him, so he could play with that. And then my husband used to go home, and we used to bring Charlie's toys from home. Manchester Children's Hospital had only recently been built. We were one of the early families to go into that hospital, so it was still being developed in terms of its resources, really. Things like toys and stuff like that. We used to go and bring stuff from home, like little animals, like Bob the Builder toys, stuff that we could clean and sterilise. I used bedpans, so we used to make... This is, maybe a week or so down the line when he was over all of that initial real trauma and being really, really poorly. And we used to make zoos, and we'd have like the lion enclosure and the elephant's enclosure. And so we used a lot of toys that we could clean, and we played with bedpans, and they were hats, and we did all sorts.
It's never in your wildest dreams do you ever imagine that you're going to have to create a play group in a high dependency unit for your child. Michelle, you're incredible. Now I want to talk to you about the experience of getting better. So obviously, Charlie had a journey to go on at this point. So once he was out of that very early, intense high risk, what was the process then for his skin recovering and getting better?
Yeah. Okay. It's such a long road, and I think it's just as well. Maybe you don't know so much at the very beginning how long the road's going to be. So Sue talked about dressing changes. So the first thing we had to get our heads around, I think about maybe 48 hours after his initial accident, was the first dressing change. So that cream and all of those bandages every 24 hours had to be removed. It had a cream. Is it called flamazine, Sue?
Flamazine, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And it contains pure silver. So it's incredible healing properties. But that has a 24-hour life. So every 24 hours, Charlie was taken from his high dependency room into a room called the bathroom, where his dressings were removed and his wound was cleaned again.
Right.
And then this fresh specialist cream reapplied and rebandaged. That happened every day for 7 days. And in terms of looking back now over the whole process, that was probably the hardest week. It was very, very painful for him to go through that. It was a really painful process. They used to give him pain relief, but it wasn't enough for him. At the hospital, the nurses said not all parents could go in. So distressing to see a child in that level of distress. And also, you're seeing the very raw wound. And as a parent, I mean, I felt, Kate, so guilty. Yeah, it took me years to get over that guilt, because I felt responsible, and I was responsible. It was my fault. It was my error and my mistake. It was an accident, but look back, it was completely preventable. If I'd have used my back burner, if I'd have put a stair gate over my kitchen door so Charlie couldn't have got in, the steps I could have taken as a mum to have prevented the accident from happening. So you go into that bathroom every day and you're looking at the extent of the injury, and you feel so guilty that you put your child through that. And I think my way of almost coping with that and dealing with that was to do my absolute best for Charlie. It's my fault that I put you in here. I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that you have the best recovery possible, that in this situation you are as happy as you possibly can be, that I am the best mummy I can be to you whilst we are here. So even in the bathroom, I used to dance. The nurses used to say, "You're mad." I used to dance and sing and tell him stories and do whatever I could to distract him in that moment, to take his mind away from that painful treatment.
Because presumably, Michelle, sorry to interrupt you there, but presumably once he'd been in that bathroom the first time, when he went in the next day, he'll have known what was going to happen. So presumably that did it make him more distressed because he knew what was coming?
Yeah. It got to the point that he was crying going down the corridor into the room because he knew what was coming. They know what's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, it got to the point that he knew when the doctor came in to give him the medication, he knew what that meant. That meant that he was having the medication because the bathroom was coming. So we had that 7 times. He went in for a week, 7 days. And then after a week, he had skin graft surgery.
Right.
Because part of his burn was called full thickness burn. I mean, Sue will be able to go into this in better detail than me, but your skin is made up of layers. So part of Charlie's injury was partial thickness and part of his injury was full thickness. So he needed a skin graft over the part of his body, which was his shoulder, the top of his arm and his torso. So they took skin from his right thigh and this was grafted on. So a week after that, he went into surgery.
Sue, with a skin graft, I mean, this poor kid has obviously had a significant burn over quite a large percentage of his body. And now you're going to take skin from somewhere else as well. What's the thinking around moving skin from one part of the body to the other? Why do that? What's the process?
Yeah, so as Michelle says, your skin is made up of layers, and if you damage just the top few layers of your skin, your body is super clever at healing. It can do a really good job, particularly children. They're really good healers, and with the right dressings and the right environment, they can replace that skin layer. But if the skin is damaged all the way through and it's a full thickness burn, so it's gone all the way through all the layers of the skin, it's very, very difficult for your body to rebuild that many layers of skin. It's just too hard. And you end up with very nasty scarring and a very, very long healing time, if at all. So we have to sometimes borrow some good skin from another part of the body, and it's just a very thin top layer of the skin, and replace it over the area where the skin is burnt. It does give you another wound, it gives you another area of skin loss, but it's a very, very thin layer of skin loss which heals quite quickly, generally within a couple of weeks. And it's really the best way to get those deeper areas of skin healed as quickly as possible, reduce the risk of infection and reduce the risk of scarring. So there is method in the madness, although, it is harsh. It is harsh to put them through another surgery and to make another wound.
Gosh, right. So I honestly, ladies, I could talk to you all day on this subject, but there will be people listening going, what happened next? What happened next? So, Michelle, let's fast forward to perhaps the time now where we're in healing and the management. So Sue mentioned about scars, and for this very perhaps superficial world that we live in, where image and look and people will want to know, what was the impact for Charlie about what does his skin look like? What did you have to do with treatment for him, perhaps towards, him coming home and the end of his treatment? What did you do?
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly it progresses, actually. Once Charlie had the skin graft, it was like, right, now it's about recovery. So days after his skin graft, we began what was called creaming and massaging. So his graft was washed with just soap and water and then creamed. So the cream I had, we're going back 13 years, Epiderm. I think I'm on a forum at the moment with parents for the burn survivors, and there's various creams that are used, and depending upon what the child can cope with and what's working for their skin. I used Epiderm, and it was creaming and rubbing and massaging the area. Grafted skin doesn't stretch. As it grows, it doesn't stretch the same as undamaged skin. And grafted skin can heal in sort of lumps and clumps and bumps. So the creaming and the massaging helps the skin to heal flat. And then Charlie's graft was over a major joint. So what we wanted as Charlie grew, bearing in mind he was 1, Kate, and he's now 6'1". We wanted to make sure that he had full movement, so he can do this with his arm, which isn't going to stop him from playing on monkey bars at the park and swimming. For me, it was more about, I want my child to have all the opportunities that are open to him. I don't want this scar to limit his opportunities that he's going to have. It takes a while to get your head around the fact that your child's going to be scarred for life. Charlie is scarred for life. This scar is never, ever, ever going to go away. But he is 15, go on holiday, he takes his top off. We use Factor 50 sun cream. And I absolutely admire his attitude to it, and his resilience is incredible. As a parent, that took me quite a lot to get my head around at the time. That not only had I caused my child this significant pain, but now he's going to look different for the rest of his life. And initially it's quite red and angry and purple and very, very obvious. Now it's quite natural to his skin colour, so it changes over time. And again, I think that's what's brilliant about this forum that we've got. Parents are at different points of the journey, and so you've got a parent right at the beginning where their child's scar is looking very purple, and a lot of us are able to say it will change colour. Over the years, the skin does, the scar does change colour. I remember the very first time I took him swimming, and I covered him up in an all-over swimming suit because I didn't want people staring at him and causing him problems. And my husband said, Michelle, he's got to get used to it, and you've got to get used to it, because people are naturally curious at anything that maybe looks a little bit different. But he will get used to that. And even if people point or maybe ask him what's happened, we need to give him the tools to say, pulled a pan of water over myself, but I'm fine now, it's fine. So that he's got that answer that he can give when people question him, or I've got answers that I can give when people say, do you mind me asking what happened to your child? It's an absolute journey, yeah.
Michelle, I think And the fact that you've been on that journey yourself, but not only that, but you've also taken on the work as an ambassador for Children's Burns Trust. And you mentioned the forum there, that you are supporting other parents through what you experienced, but such a tricky time. And ladies, thank you so much for chatting to us today. And I think what would be really good from you both is just to say, well, first of all, thank you for sharing your experiences, Michelle, and Sue, your expertise. Sue, what would you want people listening to take away from listening to this story?
I think the real message is that accidents do happen. In the real world, accidents do happen. And as much as we try our very best to keep our children safe, sometimes they are mostly a disaster waiting to happen. And accidents do happen, and that's okay. The first aid is so important. The 20 minutes of cool running water can really make the difference as to how they recover. It's important not to give yourself a hard time about these things and to move forward and be positive, because actually children particularly, but burn patients do survive huge injuries and have a real positive outcome for them. It's a long journey, as Michelle said, and there's, it's very involved, and there are periods obviously of distress and pain, but actually your body is super clever and it can heal. And so, keep your children safe. If things happen, know your first aid and don't give yourself a hard time.
Thank you, Sue. And Michelle, you have captivated everybody listening with your story, and thank you for being so frank and so honest. What do you want your work with Children's Burns Trust, but also your story, what do you want people to take away from it?
I'm sort of similar to Sue, actually, Kate. I feel like mine is a story of hope, and maybe I've focused too much on the tragedy and the hard time at the time. Charlie is at Preston North End Football Academy. He's thriving in school, doing really, really well. He's absolutely gorgeous. He's 6'1". He's strong and fit and healthy. He has great friends. He lives a brilliant life. He had a horrific experience as a baby, but he has healed and he has recovered to the point that he's thriving. There absolutely is life after a burn injury. There is life with a scar. It just hasn't stopped him. So yeah, I want people to take hope, I think, from our story, and that's a big part of the work that I love to do with the Children's Burns Trust, is to reassure parents and offer empathy, but also comfort and hope. Stay positive, keep doing what you're doing. Charlie had therapy for 9 years. We gave Charlie physiotherapy for 9 years. He wore a pressure garment for 2 years. We had numerous hospital visits, but we had lots of fun along the way. So yeah, stay positive and be hopeful.
Michelle, your resilience is infectious. Thank you so much. And I feel this story is so compelling to listen to, but also that story of hope is so important, particularly for parents that maybe are in the early stages of their children recovering from significant burns. But also, Sue, just your wise words about the fact that accidents do happen, and we can't wrap our children in cotton wool. These things tragically, they do happen, and I think it's Absolutely. How we manage that. And Michelle, your story of hope is so important. So thank you, both of you, for both your candid and expert advice that you provided to us. And after this podcast, we will signpost our listeners to Children's Burns Trust. If you want to know more about the work of Children's Burns Trust, or have questions or further questions for Sue and Michelle. So thank you to everybody who has been listening to our podcast today. It's been a really quite special one to do. I feel very honoured to chat to you both. If you want to listen to more family health podcasts, please do subscribe to make sure that you don't miss an episode. And don't forget to let us know that if there are subjects that you want us to talk about with your family's health, please get in touch. Because we are always planning. In fact, we're already planning for our next series, and we'd love to have your input as to what you would like to listen to. If you want to watch the full video of the podcast, even seeing Michelle do her shoulder exercises demonstrating about how her son was going to swing from monkey bars, you can watch the full video on our YouTube channel or subscribe via your usual podcast platforms. Thank you so much for listening to us today. Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I hope you found our podcast really useful and informative. If you want to know more about Mini First Aid classes, courses, qualification courses or first aid supplies, please do visit minifirstaid.co.uk or look us up on all your favourite social platforms at Mini First Aid. As you care for your family's well-being, remember that Unity Mutual believes in enriching lives beyond pounds and pence and is here to support both their health and financial future. Choose Unity Mutual for your junior ISA and you'll not only invest in their dreams but also receive a free mini first aid class. Thanks to Unity Mutual for making it all possible. Until next time, stay informed and financially secure, knowing that your journey with Unity Mutual is about more than just money. It's about nurturing your future and protecting your loved ones every step of the way.